My name's Dean, for those that don't know me. I'm a CCA committee member, and when not doing that, I'm the CEO of Remembrance Park Central Victoria in sunny Bendigo. Just a couple of things before we kick off this afternoon's session. The Cemetry artwork competition that they've got going up the back, they were going to have voting sheets, but because they're in plastic sleeves, just put the green dot on the your preferred winner. So when you get a moment, just pop on up and put a green dot next to that. And the other thing just to promote is really on Facebook, do the hashtag CCAVCC22 to promote the conference, whatever marketing you get. Anyway, I'm here this afternoon to introduce you to our next presenter, Charlie Stebbing. Charlie is the operations manager at Ballarat Cemetries, so knows everything about cemeteries, crematoriums. So if you've got any questions over the next 2 days, this is what Charlie looks like. Anyway, I'm going to pass you over to Charlie, who's going to talk about all good things sustainability.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you for the introduction. He's talked me up a little bit too much because I don't know everything. As Dean mentioned, I'm the ops manager for Ballarat. And he's asked me to give a presentation on sustainability. So I'll be presenting my view of the world in regards to environmental sustainability and what you can do in a cemetery. So just to give you some background, I've been with Ballarat Cemeteries for 3 years now. Previously, 25 years of experience in various roles in horticulture and infrastructure and facilities management. So just a disclaimer, I'm not an environmental scientist and I'm not the most experienced person in the room in regards to cemeteries, so I think Dean's led you up the garden path there. And also, let me apologise to start off, I'll probably use the word and and that sort of thing because I haven't done one of these for about 8 years, so I'm going to be a little bit rusty on our way through, so anything could happen. So my topic is to discuss environmental sustainability and what you can do in a cemetery. So I hope to go through what does this mean, what is environmental sustainability, and Google tells us that environmental sustainability is the responsibility interacting with the planet to maintain natural resources and avoid jeopardising the ability for future generations to meet their needs. The responsibility to conserve natural resources and protect global ecosystems to support health and well-being now and into the future, because so many decisions that impact the environment are not felt immediately. A key element of environmental sustainability is its forward-looking nature. So I like to think how the US EPA defines environmental sustainability, because the other two statements were a real mouthful and I was lucky to get those out. So meeting today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs is a much better way of terming it. So environmental sustainability is an immensely large topic with difficult to solve problems, so I'm going to go over some of those at a high level, but not go into too much detail. I'm going to present some freely available information about the issues and challenges internationally and discuss of some of what's being done. Then I'll touch on what is being done in the cemetery sector and give examples of what we've done locally to date, and finally sum it up with what might be possible to do in the future. So my presentation should only take about 10 minutes. At the end I'll take some questions on hopefully things that I can answer. A copy of the presentation should be with the presentation notes, and I think this is actually being recorded. So I hope the presentation gives you certainly a broader picture of the problems we face with environmental sustainability and some ideas that of what we could be thinking about as we go forward. So at a high level, clean air is one of the big issues. We all know about global warming and its effects. We've all seen the images of smog in the big cities from industry, or the all too regular wildfires from here or around the world. So this is a big issue, not only with net zero carbon emissions targets coming at us by 2050, but it's also about the planet's future. The next issue is clean soil and water. We need these for food production. I'll refer to some studies that show cemeteries have been found to be polluters of both, with research showing that chemicals do leach into our soils and groundwaters. The next issue we'll be talking about is good management of land. And what I mean by that is the appropriate use of available space. The world is becoming a crowded place, especially within the last 200 years. For cemeteries, we are going to need clever and appropriate landscapes when creating new cemeteries or gardens or spaces in existing cemeteries that should have less inputs of water, fuels, pesticides and fertilisers, and needs lower maintenance, but still providing surrounds and nice areas for visitors to come to the cemetery. And finally, I'll be touching on recycling of metals and other waste materials generated by cemeteries, which in most cases is a good news story for us. So clean air. As mentioned, this is a big issue for the cemeteries, in particular with crematoria and the net zero emissions coming by 2050. In 2015, 196 parties to the Paris Agreement committed to transforming their developed trajectories towards sustainability and called for limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees C, but ideally 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. To meet these goals, carbon dioxide emissions need to be reduced by 45% by 2030 from our 2010 levels and reach net zero by 2050. We've all seen and heard of these targets from the United Nations many times, so hopefully we can do something about them. So to summarise clean air, on a global scale, there are carbon emission targets that most major economies have signed up to and hopefully are acting upon, with a plan of reduction of fossil fuel consumption and an increase in the adoption of alternative energy sources. In Australia, we seem to want to do the right thing with large investment by governments and privates in wind, solar and green energy products. But as a country, in my opinion, we do contradict this with the export of coal, but I suppose that's what makes our economy tick. The Class A's in Victoria are working on understanding their carbon emissions with the joint project to benchmark the Class A current position, in particular crematoria. This project is still ongoing and I'm sure there will be more to say in the future about the findings. And at a local level at Ballarat, recently we've completed a carbon study into our carbon footprint of where we are today, and we're commencing to work on a roadmap of where we need to get to by 2050. So part of the roadmap has been to do projects such as the installation of a more fuel efficient cremator a few years ago. We're now seeing the promised gas efficiencies as our cremation numbers have increased, but our gas usage has remained relatively stable. We're up about 25 or 30% more efficient in the crematorium. So we've also installed 100 kilowatts of solar power, which provides electricity for our administration area, chapel and crematorium buildings. The solar was also installed to the cemetery workshop and runs a pump in one of our ornamental creeks. We also transitioned from small engine plant to battery operated plant, and where possible we're using these types of tools to maintain our gardens. Our investment in battery gardening tools is providing a couple of benefits. Firstly, there's less emissions from the small engines, but secondly it's protecting our staff from damaging noise. We've also placed an order for a second battery operated all-terrain vehicle, and that's for use for the gardening staff, so they're a very nice quiet machine to use around the cemetery. And we were also operating a couple of the robotic mowers, which you would have seen the Husqvarna guys demonstrating outside with some success. So the next issue I wanted to discuss was clean soil and water. Cemeteries have been found to be polluters of both, with many studies showing that chemicals from burials do leach into soils and groundwaters. While looking through the literature of this topic, I came across many articles and papers on the subject. One paper as far back as 2004 called The Potential Groundwater Pollutants from Cemeteries by Hart and Casper, who wrote the paper for the public body protecting and improving the environment in England and Wales, their report considered the components of graves, including the organic and inorganic body constituents, and reviews the likely processes of decay which liberate these body constituents into the surrounding soils and groundwaters. The media also likes to cover this topic as well, as I found many articles and news pieces while researching. In an article written by Joe Russell Clark in 2019 called Rethinking the Landscape of Death for the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, Russell Clark wrote that cemeteries are among the most toxic of modern landscapes in both their immediate and ongoing environmental impacts and intensive use of resources. She cited several academic research papers from the UK and also cited a 2014 document, A Will of the Woods, which outlines the problems of a typical American-style funeral, the resource-intensive materials of caskets that have become commonplace in much of the world. The documentary claims that in the US alone, approximately 33 million board feet of mostly virgin wood, 60,000 tonnes of steel, 1.6 million tonnes of reinforced concrete, and 5 million gallons of toxic embalming fluid are put into the ground every year. So this is just an image of a side-by-side comparison of a traditional burial to a green burial, courtesy of SMCT's webpage. So I've plagiarised their webpage for this image. It's a really good one. So when looking at the research done, it becomes apparent what's going on below the surface. A paper presented locally to the Australian Cemeteries and Crematoria Association, the National Conference in Sydney in 1995, A Watery Grave, the role of hydrology in cemetery practice, describes when rainfall reaches the Earth's surface, it can run off to streams or percolate into soil and rock and become groundwater. Waters that percolate through cemeteries will carry with them some elements of the interred remains. Any dissolved materials may eventually pass into the environment. The possible effects will vary greatly with the range of geology and groundwater settings that exist in various cemetery sites. There's also more research that's been found recently in 2021 on urban cemeteries in Brazil. It goes on and on. So there has been still is research being done across environmental impacts of cemeteries across the world. So to summarise the issue of clean soil and water, globally, particularly in North America, green and sustainable cemeteries have emerged as alternative to traditional cemeteries. 2 cemeteries in British Columbia actively market their businesses as environmentally sustainable. And across the US, this is becoming common with accreditation programs by such organisations as the Green Burial Council, a non-profit organisation that provides certification for providers, and the Conservation Burial Alliance, which, and this is quoted from their website, is a collaborative of conservation burial grounds and invested allies that foster the conservation and sustainable management of lands with natural burial for the benefit of people and the planet. So maybe some good things do come out of North America. Locally, cemeteries and funeral directors are offering green burial options. For example, GMCT's bushland burial areas at Healesville and Lilydale Memorial Park, SMCT's Murrin Naroon natural burial offering, and Bear Funerals and Natural Grace Funeral Directors offering green options also. At Ballarat, we are setting aside areas in our master plan for green burial options, but we still need to determine the types of offerings for these areas. So we are interested in what's going on at other cemeteries here and overseas. The next issue to discuss in my list of topics was good management of the land. And what I mean by this is this term is the appropriate use of the available space, especially for burial and memorialisation. Clever and appropriate landscapes are needed. Creating gardens and spaces in cemeteries that are going to require less inputs of water, fuel, pesticides, fertilisers, require lower maintenance while still providing that pleasing surround for families and visitors. We are somewhat lucky in Australia that we have land when compared to other parts of the world. The image I'm just displaying there is a hillside cemetery in Hong Kong. So at a workshop conducted by the Melbourne Uni Death Tech team titled The Future Cemetery, the workshop identified land supply as one of the major challenges. The workshop summary states existing and future demand on cemetery land provisions, especially with cemeteries reaching capacity and demand for more land within reasonable travel distances. The workshop report also stated that discussion touched on the idea of a high-rise urban cemetery. So this is a concept that was, I think it's an overseas company called Green Diary have come up with this idea, and it's been floated around the world in a couple of workshops. So the workshop by the Melbourne Uni Death Tech team, also the participants there discussed the need for more investigation of environmental issues around future cemetery planning. So we are doing some good work locally in this space, pardon the pun. So places like Kuwaitan Cemetery down in the Western Districts might be onto something with upright burial options as a better use of the land. Maybe this type of design requires less land, so I'm not sure. I don't know the full impact of how this works, but yeah, maybe we require less space to do it like this. Locally at Ballarat, each year we have a number of what we term infill projects, where we look at redesign of existing areas to increase our capacity. We achieve this by minor changes in the landscape to provide additional, say an additional lawn beam in a burial area, or an additional garden bed in a small headstone area, just to increase our capacity. So minor changes to your landscape design can provide ways for better use of the land. The final issue I wish to discuss is recycling, and in particular recycling of metals and other waste materials generated by the cemeteries. Again, when looking at the literature on the issue, I found a couple of international research papers regarding recycling and cemeteries. The first paper was titled "Cemetery Waste as a Substream of Municipal Waste, Research and Structure of the Selective Waste Collection in Poland," which is an extremely exciting title, only kidding. This looks at cemetery waste as just another stream of waste for local government to deal with. But one interesting statement of the paper, which I suspect is true, is that the human factor was recognised as the most significant determining efficiency of the selective collection of cemetery waste. Therefore, further education of society, as well as promoting good practices in the field of cemetery waste management, should be regarded as desirable. So at Ballarat, we found that the introduction of a soft plastics recycling program with the install of specific soft plastic bins, that without ongoing education of the public or our visitors, these bins just became another general waste bin. So we need to do more in relation to educating people and visitors, possibly with better signage around these bins and further education. In the other paper I found, Recycling of Metals Following Cremation, 2004, produced by the UK's Institute of Cemetery and Crematorium Management, it discussed approvals required to join the Royal Dutch Cremation Federation's recycling scheme. And in 2022, this program is still ongoing and is across the world in 30 countries, in which we and other Victorian crematoria also participate in. So this is a great success story in recycling. Other areas of recycling that we deal with locally are green waste. We have to manage our green waste on site, so we mulch that a couple of times a year. We compost it and then reuse it in all of our garden beds instead of it being disposed into landfill or burning off, which was a previous practice carried out. We also have office space recycling programs for paper, plastic, soft plastics and glass. As the cemetery's recycling is not collected as part of the council waste collection program, it is stored on site and either collected by external companies or directly taken to depots. We are also focused on a reduction in general paper usage across the business. So to sum up, we've touched on the key issues of clean air. We know in 2015, 196 parties signed up to the Paris Agreement, and that emissions need to be reduced by 2030 and they need to be net zero by 2050. Governments and private industry have invested heavily in wind, solar and green energy projects now, And the cemetery sector is doing work on ways to reduce its emissions and quantify what our emissions are at the moment. So we can look forward to knowing where we need to get to by 2030 and 2050. Clean soil and water. Research proves that cemeteries have been found to be polluters of both soil and water. Where we know overseas and locally there is a growing interest in green and sustainable funerary services. We know local cemeteries and funeral directors are starting to offer green and sustainable services. Good management of the land. We know we are luckier than some other places around the world with our available land, particularly regionally. We need to get planners thinking about the future. We also know that we need to include in our planning for cemeteries and service clever and appropriate landscapes and products, as well as building in sustainability as one of the design pillars for any new cemetery developments in the future. In recycling, we know we are doing good things already with companies like Ortho Metals. We just need to keep getting better at it. So hopefully a few takeaways from my present today is something you can look at it for your local cemetery or your business. You know, from putting in solar power to buying green energy, even mulching rather than burning off or sending it to landfill, or when you're looking at replacing your gardening tools or any of your plant and equipment, you know, consider the battery powered stuff. It's actually really got to a point where it's very professional equipment. So thank you. That's the end of my discussion. So if we can think locally and act locally, I think we can make a big difference, particularly with environmental sustainability around our cemeteries. So thank you.